right, good evening and welcome. This is KTN Weekend Prime, the points of news on February the 1st.
Yeah.
Here on KTN Weekend Prime, we've got lots lined up for you. My name is John Allen Namu.
And I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole, our sign language interpreter. At the bottom of your screen tonight is Meresha Awiti.
And heavy discussion topic this weekend, as usual on Checkpoint. We're discussing Chapter 6, Leadership and Integrity, that chapter that is often forgotten in the Kenyan Constitution.
Yes, quite. But in 2012, they didn't forget it. If you recall, Parliament passed some changes to that bill that many say made it effectively moribund, if you'd like. So this is just something of what we've captured. Now, this is what state officers must adhere to. They must bring honor to the nation, dignity to the office. They must promote public confidence in the integrity of the office, and they must not demean, or none of their actions should demean, the office that they hold. Yes,
and yet,
I know. Yeah, that look on your face says it all, because a lot of people would say, well, you know, there's a lot of this that's been breached, and we're taking a look at very many of the incidences. Of course, Keter is the one that comes to mind, but let's not forget there is Evans Kidero, a matter that was settled out of court, and now CIC is coming out guns blazing saying we've got to put a stop to this. But here's an interesting question. People are talking about gender bias in this.
Really?
Only one person has been removed on account of breach of Chapter 6, and it was a woman, Nancy Baraza. A lot of the others who've been said to have breached it have all been men and have been allowed to get away with it, slap on the wrist, apologize here, out of court settlement there. So those are just some of the questions we'll be taking a look at. And so, of course, your feedback, the hashtag is Checkpoint that we're using tonight on Twitter. Is it gender biased? Is it up to you? Is the CIC doing enough? Can the EACC rein in this sort of terror?
That's a very interesting perspective. I wonder what people are going to be saying about that. Like Yvonne said, you can contribute to Checkpoint. Another interesting perspective that we're pursuing tonight is on that African Court of Justice. Kenya just pledged 92 million shillings by the going rates of the dollar, because it was $1 million to the setting up of that court. What that portends for justice on the African continent. We've got Asha Mwilu on that story, but lots more to talk about on KTN Weekend Prime. Let's get into the highlights.
Join me in ensuring that the necessary ratifications are in place and the resulting court is fully owned, financed and driven by Africa.
Tunaunga mkono ule uamuzi umetolewa kule Addis Ababa.
Jubilee closes ranks in the anti-ICC push.
Nobody is giving any valid reasons as to why we should initiate any moves to withdraw from the ICC.
That is really right to go and purport to be speaking on behalf of the people of Kenya without asking the people of Kenya.
So which way for Kenya? The proposed African court versus the ICC?
Gavana itolewe.
Hakuna haja ya sisi kukorofana na tupeleke incitement kwa wananchi.
And what ails Narok? The underlying factors of the recent unrest. Also coming up, the changing face of the Njurin Cheke.
Once again, many thanks for joining us on KTN Weekend Prime, the points of news. Let's get started with a section of Jubilee leaders who support Kenya's position on the formation of an East African Court of Justice and Human Rights. Kenya was the first to sign the Malabo Protocol, which proposes the creation of the court, with President Uhuru Kenyatta pledging 92 million shillings towards the establishment of the court during the just concluded African Union Summit.
Now, led by Senate Majority Leader Kithure Kindiki, the Jubilee leaders say an African court to take over the mandate of the International Criminal Court will better solve African issues on African soil.
Maintain our resolve.
A lot was on the agenda of the 24th African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, including the Ebola outbreak and terrorism by Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. But for the Kenyan delegation led by President Uhuru Kenyatta, something else appeared to be of much interest: the establishment of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights.
Brothers and sisters, to join me in ensuring that the necessary ratifications are in place and the resulting court is fully owned, financed and driven by Africa.
The establishment will have to be supported by all 53 African Union member states. Back home, the proposal is already gaining support.
We want to support our president that we need to have African Court of Justice. We support msimamo ya president ambaye alisema jana. We will support it financially and even politically to have an African court.
Tunaunga mkono ule uamuzi umetolewa kule Addis Ababa na mataifa yote ya muungano wa Afrika.
The African Court of Justice and Human Rights, it is envisaged, will be an alternative to the International Criminal Court.
Ukiangalia judge pale kwa ICC ni Mwafrika. Ukiangalia ile prosecutor ni Mwafrika. Kwa hivyo hiyo koti, kwa nini isiletwe Afrika tu, tusiwe tunaenda mbali sana? That is why we are saying, let us build an African Court of Justice.
Already, there are moves to pull out of the International Criminal Court. The National Assembly in 2013 approved a motion to have Kenya withdraw from the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the ICC. 34 African countries are signatories to the statute.
We are supporting the pulling out of all African countries from the Rome Statute that establishes the International Criminal Court. Wacha tuache wazungu waendelee na mahakama yao. And that is the position.
Kenya was the first to sign the Malabo Protocol, proposing the establishment of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights, and will be hoping that AU member states will make the proposal a reality. Rita Tinina, KTN.
At a just concluded African Union summit in Addis Ababa, African leaders agreed to form an African court, arguing that the ICC is an imperialist court. While that argument has sparked a major debate among Africans, one British scholar agrees with the AU. Ashamwilu reports.
To maintain our resolve towards ensuring adequate.
The African leaders resolved to abandon the International Criminal Court and form an African court may have elicited diverse opinions from Africans, but the AU's move has received a boost from an unlikely source.
The claim to be truly international is not really based on the evidence.
British author David Hoyle released his book titled Justice Denied, terming the ICC as a racist court.
Within the founding statute of the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, agreed in 1998, 2 articles give the United Nations Security Council special prosecutorial rights. Now the irony is that 3 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the United States, China and Russia, are not members of the ICC.
But as David pokes holes into the International Criminal Court, Professor Atuoli Lukoye thinks that by signing the Rome Statute, African leaders made their bed and must lay on it.
Same people who were in government and in opposition at the time and who supported the ICC are still around in government and in opposition. And these cases, when they were taken to the ICC, again it was with full cooperation of the then government and opposition. And up to now, they are still around.
We tried as much as we could with President Kibaki to create a local mechanism to deal with our cases. We tried as hard to persuade our members of parliament to pass a law that would have enabled us to set up a local tribunal.
Part of the newly released book is this argument that the ICC is controlled by its funders.
He who pays the musician, he who pays the piper, will call the tune. 2/3 of the funding for the International Criminal Court comes from Europe, and specifically the European Union member states. So it serves in effect as a de facto servant of the people who fund it.
An argument that appeared to inform the AU's decision to opt for an African court.
Kenya today pledges $1 million to the establishment of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. I urge you brothers and sisters, to join me in ensuring that the necessary ratifications are in place and the resulting court is fully owned, financed and driven by Africa.
There are failures that have been mentioned, including what we hear now, that the ICC is being presented as a court of the West against poor African countries and so on and so forth. But those are not subjects that can be fully exhausted or discussed at this point in time, being in the thick of action with ICC.
I don't think that it is really right to go and purport to be speaking on behalf of the people of Kenya without asking the people of Kenya.
And while the president's lobbying for a more local court could not be divorced from the strategy to have William Ruto's case at the ICC dropped, could the opposition leader be warming up as a defense witness for Ruto?
If I am asked to testify, I am willing and ready to testify on behalf of my party, the Orange Democratic Movement. But so far, I have not been requested.
In response, Deputy President William Ruto sent a statement to the newsrooms saying that he welcomes Raila's offer to testify. Ruto, however, says that his conscience remains clear, adding that he believes that he will soon be vindicated as his legal team handles his case on issues of evidence. And as African leaders juggle between the fight for independence and the allegations of impunity, it still remains to be seen whether the AU will successfully advocate for the referral of the pending African cases back to the continent. Asha Mwilu, KTN.
Makueni Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr. is convinced that finding the exact cause of his father's death will be a tall order. The senator says this is after the family's appointed pathologist questioned the validity of the samples used in the autopsy. In an interview with KTN's Aaron Ochieng, Mutula Jr. revealed that his recent summons to record a statement with the CID was linked to the British pathologist's refusal to append his signature to the autopsy report. Here now is part of that interview.
A few days ago you were at the CID headquarters.
Yes.
You've been summoned to explain a few things in regard to tampering with the materials that were to be used for autopsy.
Yes.
Maybe if you could take us through that.
Yes, my statement to the CID arises from the post-mortem. Mm-hmm. After the post-mortem of my late father was done, we agreed, because we had family pathologists, we had the government pathologist, and we had the British pathologist by the name Professor Calder. It is only later, 10 months, November 2013, that we come to learn from Professor Calder that he received his samples on 14th of May, which is equivalent to almost 15 days after the postmortem of my late father, and the samples were unsealed and appeared tampered with. That is the point we started having problems. And in his report, he said that irrespective of the fact that the samples appeared contaminated, in his own words, the cause of my father's death was something he called catastrophic, something that was ingested that caused catastrophic hemorrhage. That's why he had 3 liters of blood in his lung. I pressed his chest, when I found him in his bed, blood oozed from his nose. By the time we were at Leafin Row home, blood was still coming out of his mouth. So therefore, the only downside about what transpired is that the samples were contaminated in such a way that we could not get any other samples to send to Professor Calder to ensure that he conducts an alternative examination and therefore signs his report. So he has issued a report with a caveat that I will not sign this report because the samples that you gave me appeared to have been contaminated and interfered with.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think or believe probably your late father was assassinated?
I don't believe. It's a fact that my late father was given or ingested or somebody caused his death. It's obvious.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why would someone want Mutula Kilonzo dead?
It's a good question. It's a good question because there's no seat he wanted. There's nobody he owed money. There's nothing that he was looking after other than himself. He was not a threat to anybody, either in leadership or otherwise. So, I mean, that is a question that I'll ask myself for a long time, because I do not know the reason why anybody would want Mutula Kilonzo, that nice, legal and clear mind, out of the face of the earth. It's the most unusual thing that I can think of.
Okay, the mystery surrounding the investigations into his death are so complicated. Do you think we'll ever find the truth?
I'm not quite sure, because from what I've seen in the post-mortem, I don't think people are keen to know what happened to him. Suffice to say, for my own purposes, and maybe for other family members, I am myself persuaded, convinced 100% that my father died of unnatural causes, and in this case poison, a poisonous substance. That for me would be good enough. As to whether we will find the chain of people who did this, or one person, or 3 people, or 5 people, it will not bring my father to life. But there's somebody somewhere who is walking this God's green earth, and that person caused my father's death. And for the life of me, God will pay that person or persons for what I would call absolute cold-blood murder of the late Mutula Kilonzo.
Right, in the second part of that interview that will be aired tomorrow, Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr. speaks on the leadership impasse in Makueni County. So make sure you catch that on KTN Prime tomorrow with Linda Gutu and Ben Kitili.
All right, that was just about time for Checkpoint. Right after the break, discussing what's on that board, Chapter 6, leadership and integrity. Is this something that we are adhering to in this country as concerns our leaders, state officers specifically? Yvonne Okwara is going to be hosting that discussion. All of her panelists, I can now confirm, are in the building and are waiting to discuss this.
They are indeed here. And, you know, we will be speaking to one man whose client was the first to actually use Chapter 6 to bring down a high-profile state official. We'll be speaking to Irungu Kangata. If you remember him, he represented Kerubo against Nancy Baraza. She was then removed. Was it gender-biased? Was it tribal? Here's an interesting tweet. Stephen at SVETS M1 says, all those that have dishonored their office have political and tribal backing. Nancy Baraza did not have that. So, some interesting viewpoints. Keep them coming in.
Extremely interesting viewpoints. And like she said, you can contribute. The hashtags right there. Hashtag Checkpoint. Tweet me or tweet Yvonne, and we'll try and get your views into this discussion. But that's right after the break on KTN Weekend Prime, the points of news.
Thank you for staying with us on Checkpoint. The hashtag on Twitter is Checkpoint. You can also get in touch with us on SMS. The number is 22155. Today we're talking about the latest breaches of Chapter 6. Just what will it take to have our state officers, our elected officials, just, you know, towing the line of integrity. Once upon a time, the law was mooted to have much more powers than it does. Sadly, Parliament watered that down, and we're discussing that today in light of recent events from Qatar. We'll be going all the way back to some of the others, and that prompted the CIC to put an ad out in the paper. We'll be getting to that in just a moment. I want you to take a look at my panel tonight. We have Irungu Kangata, who's a member of Parliament, Thank you for joining us. And also the man, like we said just before the break, who knows Chapter 6 all too well. In the beginning, Nancy Baraza, this is the same individual. Now he's in Parliament. We'll be taking a look at his role there now. We also have Atieno Ndomo, who's a governance expert, as well as Kamotho Waiganjo. Thank you for joining us, Commissioner, with the CIC. Let's start with you. You put out an ad in the paper last week, and you were basically reminding us all of Chapter 6, including the leaders. Tell us, obviously we know what prompted that, but just tell us the Commission's feeling on the latest events.
I think, Yvonne, the Commission has been concerned by the very casual disregard of that chapter, and the fact that whereas in the beginning, after the enactment of the Constitution, our expectations on public servants, particularly those defined as state officers, were very high, over time we have come familiar and okay with all manner of misconduct that falls, against the provisions of Chapter 6. And I think because Kenyans sometimes forget why it is that we had a Chapter 6, then it's very easy that we'll get to a point where it will no longer make sense. And most people will actually think it was suspended or doesn't exist anymore. And I think we need to remember that in our Constitution, one of the innovations that the Constitution has, if you compare with the South African Constitution, for example, which we borrowed heavily from, the South African Constitution doesn't have a chapter on leadership and integrity. Right from Bombers, we had, I think it was Chapter 9, we had a chapter on leadership and integrity. Why? Because we understood that however good, what I would call the hardware of the Constitution was, the institutions, the processes, if we do not get it right on the software, which is our values, our conduct, our character, then that Constitution after some time would mean nothing. So that is why it was important to have a strong chapter. And the Constitution then said, we have told you what is expected. Now Parliament make a law to ensure that this is enforceable. And that is part of our challenge. If you look at the Leadership and Integrity Act that was eventually passed, it's very strong on what must happen in terms of expectations, but the consequences and the process of enforcement is very weak. And then what has happened is over time, institutions also that have responsibility, even the little powers that are there, have also not been exercised. So in a sense, we are all okay now, and people can get away with anything. Yeah.
Just to pick up what you said, we are all okay with it. Atieno, did it surprise you, though, that even after the Keter saga, many people, even on social media and in other spheres, public spheres, were saying, well, he didn't do anything different from what some of us have done with cursed at public officials before. Does it bother you that we're all very complacent, that this is who we are, perhaps?
To kind of build on the point that Kamotho is making, I think for me it feels as though we're a society that's facing a very deep ethical leadership crisis. So the fact that, we can turn the other eye and sort of say, if I were in his shoes, I probably would have done the same, speaks to what it is that we value as a society. You can have good laws, you can have a good constitution, but without the culture for constitutionalism, without the culture to respect the rule of law. And I think that the problem we are facing needs us to reflect as a nation and to ask the question, do we have values, that can make a difference? I think one of the problems is, in my view, the fact that public office in this country is not equivalent to service. I think public office is actually about privilege. It's about arrogance. It's about contempt for the people of Kenya. And, you just need to, every day, I think the stories are all over for us to see. So there is a fundamental problem there, that you actually elect people, and this is also a verdict on the people who elect these leaders. You elect people who treat you with contempt, brazenly break the laws.
That being said, when this the Leadership and Integrity Act was being passed in 2012, the members of Parliament said it was not up to the EACC to vet state officials or those seeking elective office, that this would be done by the voters themselves. And now we're saying, look at who we are. So are we not capable then of holding our leaders to account?
We can't keep passing the buck. I think a lot of fundamental things have gone wrong. So part of the problem, for instance, with the institutions that are supposed to be, ensuring there's scrutiny and ensuring that the laws are being followed, is partly also a problem about confidence, the way in which commissions have been appointed. And Kamotho is sitting here, but I dare say, they're 4 years old. But this is where we first got it wrong. I think I had serious problems with the way in which CIC was appointed. The reason why appointment matters is because accountability then is dependent on the appointment process. This commission was appointed by the coalition government, the Grand Coalition government, in a very opaque process. You know, other than the newspaper advertisement, in the end, the whole process seemed very opaque. The problem with that is then you do not know where the loyalties lie of the commissions. Yet the constitutional commissions, if you look at what the spirit of the constitution had anticipated, they should have been vouching and looking out for the citizenry. Compounding this problem is also the issue of emoluments. I'm sorry I have to say it. I just feel I have to say it the way it is, because the way in which remuneration of constitutional commissions has happened has also alienated them from the citizenry and from the public.
All right. Before we come to you, Rungu, I'd like you to respond to that.
I don't know. I think we can have a discussions about a criticism of the commissions. And I think the commissions are public entities. They're entitled to be criticized. And I think that's true. I think if institutions have failed in their public duty, that is a discussion for some time. And I think we need to look at each institution's mandate and say, in relation to its mandate, where has an institution failed? That's number one. I think a discussion on remuneration and whether people are paid, overpaid, whether that distances them from the people is, for me, an unfortunate discussion at this point
so
in our process.
So you believe you're in touch with the people?
Especially, no, it's not about entitled or not, because at the end of the day, there's a process by which terms of state officers are set. They are not set by the state officers. The state officers are independent observers of the process. Those people go through certain processes to determine what is reasonable. Now, to say that was too much or too high, from whose perspective? And I think that's a conversation that may distract us from very critical issues we're talking about the conduct of state officers, which is live and is going on even as we speak.
Okay. So I am not misunderstood, Yvonne. I'm sorry to have to butt in. I am a Kenyan citizen, asking these questions as a citizen, and one who's very well-meaning and very actively involved. The reason why remuneration matters, and right now we know we have issues to do with teachers' pay, we have issues to do with paying health workers in this country. I think there's a discussion to be had about the way in which public service wages are skewed and are not fair. And that there's a direct correlation between that and outcomes and the expectations that citizens can have. There's a way in which loyalties will be skewed towards those people. You know, I could go on and on, but I think that many Kenyans understand what I'm saying.
Okay, and we'll get back to that and talking about loyalties and whether then these commissions have been effective, including the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
And they have security of tenure for that very reason. The reason why, for instance, CIC has Commission of Tenure. CIC is 4 years old. It's the oldest, actually. Should have been like the soul of constitutional commissions. If you look at their mandate, and I understand the mandate of CIC very well, they should have been the people making sure the spirit, the heart of the Constitution is
So you believe the CIC, you know, should take part
in that? They have failed us.
Which is fine. And you see, I'd like a discussion on the question of the credibility of commissions and their mandates. The problem, in a few minutes, if we're going to discuss about state officers and we start discussing salaries and whether that will not help us. I think it's a legitimate public discussion. The question is the time. And I would never sit here to discuss whether CIC has worked well. Who am I to discuss that? It's for Kenyans to discuss that. The question is for them.
All right. We will get back to that in a minute. Let's bring in Irungu Kangata. Many people, someone said to me, having been the man who, some would say, single-handedly brought down Nancy Baraza, who was the Deputy Chief Justice at the time, that you aren't as vocal as people would have expected on matters of integrity and accountability in Parliament. What would you say to that?
Well, for now, I cannot blow my own trumpet. To the best of my knowledge, I think I've done my little, or maybe my best towards raising those issues of integrity in Parliament. Be that as it may, maybe those issues are not maybe captured in the media, or maybe when they are captured, they are not really amplified in a proper manner.
Here's a moment. Would you tell us about some of your efforts in Parliament towards making sure that Chapter 6 is adhered to by your fellow members of Parliament?
Well, number one, in my own opinion, the first issue has to do with the issue of fighting to ensure these institutions are guaranteed in terms of their independence. That one, wherever those discussions come in Parliament, I do make my own contribution. Number two, to me, the whole issue of abuse of office has to do with corruption, because let's say, for instance, the issue of Mr. Kater, which was happening in Rift Valley. The bottom line probably has to do, maybe someone wanted to take something, I don't know, from either side. Be that as it may. So therefore my proposal was...
You sound like you're justifying Kater's actions.
Not really, no.
So do you condemn the actions?
I do, 100% I do. So therefore, in my own opinion, what I did when I went to Parliament, I proposed an amendment to the public, to the laws which govern our leaders, to enhance penalty for mega corruption. by sheer bad luck, that proposal was not supported by members.
So to enhance what you say, penalties on corruption,
yes.
Let's talk about leadership and integrity. We know what happened in 2012, which was just before the elections, and how certain aspects of that act were watered down. For example, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission was denied prosecutorial powers. They were not allowed to vet those seeking elective office. Is that something you want to revive in Parliament? Do you think that'll help to tame this sort of runaway cases of state officials behaving badly?
Yes, indeed. And maybe when we reopen, we can consider bringing about those amendments.
However, that's not something you've done in Parliament since you were elected.
Not yet.
Why not?
Truthfully speaking, because of course we thought, by the way, we do have other institutions which, as of today, they ought to have probably addressed these issues. One, the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, which is a government-funded body. Two, the CIC to a certain extent. Three, the judiciary. Of course, any Kenyan has the right to go to court and lodge a suit based on Chapter 6, notwithstanding that the law, the enabling law, is not strong enough. So therefore, I do feel, strictly speaking, we do not need new law. The present laws that we have, they are sufficient. A private citizen...
Okay, great. Yet, they've been unable to tame Kidero's behavior, although there was a private settlement to which the CIC says that still would not prevent a case being brought against him based on Chapter 6. We have Kitero. Take a look at members of Parliament, misbehaving during the Security Amendments Bill. Papers were being thrown all over, water was being poured. But you say with all of this, even Sonko, who's the senator, walking around brandishing guns, you say the laws are sufficient, yet they haven't been able to do that since Nancy Baraza was removed.
Two things. We have what we call a political culture. Presently, the political culture that we have is not sufficient. In terms of laws, there are sufficient laws. There are sufficient institutions. Take, for instance, the Office of the Director, Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. He ought to have prosecuted Mr. Kitero. He ought to have prosecuted Mr. Sonko.
On what laws, though? On what ground?
Creating disturbance, for instance. So therefore, we have sufficient laws which DPP can act upon and rein on limbs.
Right.
I was just going to say, the Nancy case, and even at the time, I think I probably was not with the wider public view, and I feel that the woman was lynched. It was like a lynching. She was rendered guilty before even she had due process. And we perfectly can see how we're a society of double standards. The kind of public outrage and, subsequent actions that then got her out of office, if we were using the same zeal, then clearly some of this wouldn't have. But we are an animal farm. It's like what I said before. Some animals are more equal than others.
No, objection. Allow me to object on that account. Why are you
objecting? We're animal farm. You just said yourself.
Thank you.
The penal code
is a political issue that prevents
the point is, to me, those people who are saying that what happened to Nancy is unfair, taking into account the present circumstances, they appear to ignore Kerubo as a woman. They appear to assume as if Kerubo does not. Kerubo is not entitled to rights. So to me, when they talk about a woman is that rich, educated lady, not the poor people in Kibera, not the poor ladies in Kibera. So therefore, for her, she looks at the lady in terms of a big person, a big rich woman, but not the poor woman.
No.
Let me give you a good. Let me give you another example.
You're choosing to misinterpret what I just said.
Let me give you a good example. During the fight that was in Parliament. The most ashaming thing that happened, there were many fights, but the most ashaming thing that happened was that incident of Gladys Wanga sprinkling water on another woman. So therefore you cannot say, because this one is a woman, you won't take action, whereas indeed it's a woman who does wrong. It doesn't matter whether you are a woman or a man. So long as you do wrong, you should be action should be taken upon you. But Kerubo is still a woman.
Yvonne, I think just because he's misinterpreting what I said, and I'm just sitting right here, my point wasn't about Kerubo being a smaller woman or Nancy being a bigger woman. I pretty much just said there's a selective way in which this country can choose to apply the law. And with hindsight, you can clearly see that there were double standards applied. It is not a question of saying Nancy did not do whatever it is. I just feel that as a country we were never even able to quite know what exactly is it that transpired.
That's right.
It was tried in the media, it was tried everywhere else. And I think now when you look back, you really have to ask questions seriously about whether Nancy had a fair hearing. And I think for me at that time it was clear. So my point right now is about the selective application. If the same zeal that Irungu had for defending Kerubo, with the same zeal that he had to apply to the 1,000 other cases that we have, and he's a lawyer and he's a lawmaker right now, I mean, there will be a very different result.
I'd like you to respond to that. The zeal with which you went after Nancy Baraza, of course defending your client, but again, the issue of that coming up with all of these incidents that we've seen to date, perhaps people feeling that that is your presence in that regard is not being felt in the National Assembly.
No, for obvious reason.
To
me, as at that time, I was just doing as per the instructions which I was given by
your client.
Yes, indeed, I was following instructions.
Okay, so now your client are the members of Kiharu, for example, that you represent.
Yeah, the point is, I get instructions to go after Keter, I'll go after him. I get instructions to go after any other person who is violating Chapter 6.
Your role now is different, being a lawmaker, in which case your client is the taxpayer.
Fine, be that well, fine, I concede in Parliament.
And if the taxpayer wants you to rein in on errant behavior of elected officials,
I will do that. And once we reopen
so you're not
Parliament,
aware that that might be their mandate or what they want you to do?
No, I am aware, and once we are back in Parliament, we are going to insist. And by the way, we have already done that as the Jubilee. We have said that indeed these two leaders, they should not hide behind our Jubilee coalition. And we have already given an opinion that the DPP should take action. To me, I'm asking myself, why is it that DPP has not taken any action?
You know, Yvonne, we made several mistakes as a people, and Parliament must take responsibility. The intention of the Constitution, both in Article 104, Article 99, was actually even before you're elected. There's a process by which, in fact, it says you must comply with ethical and moral requirements that will be set by law. Nothing like that anywhere. There's a process by which actually the Constitution even says that you can lose your seat because of breaching the provisions of Chapter 6. No process provided for. Now, the problem with the Nancy Baraza issue is not what happened to Nancy. And I think we need to be careful not to say, because the standard we set to her and we haven't followed it, we did something wrong. What was done was right. The problem is that we never followed it. You know what I mean? So the problem is not that we made a mistake there. We did right. But thereafter, consistently, we have reduced. And by the way, I agree that there's usually a gender angle to these issues. Do you know, for example, I can almost bet, when members of the county assembly in Machakos the other day were fighting, there was a fisticuff all over the place. I can bet that if there was a bunch of women MCs, I think there was one, I suspect that the public outrage would have been a lot more serious. And public outrage is necessary because ultimately the reason that institutions even react to issues is because of public outrage. So there's a place for public outrage, and the public outrage in Nancy Baraza was important. What is the problem in our country is we are also a very dysfunctional society, that even though we purport to hold people to very high esteem, after some time we are okay with all manner of misbehavior. And that, what we were saying in our notice, is unacceptable. And finally, the point is a responsibility for the public also. When Chapter 6 was written, we all assumed that that chapter was addressed to the leaders. That chapter was also addressed to the public. It was also saying, when you elect, there are certain character and caliber of people you must never allow into public office. In a sense, we have said, let's wait for what the law will say and what ICC will do. And we are helpless Kenyans just waiting. But if we are given the opportunity, we would elect the same charlatans, and it doesn't matter. There's also a responsibility on the public to reread Chapter 6.
But like you said, no mechanisms have been put in place for that.
Let me tell you, one critical mechanism is called the vote. And we are about to go to an election. You see, when the citizen sits helpless and say, even if you allow those people to stand, however bad we know they are, we will elect them. So please stop them from standing. Because sometimes that's a conversation we have. That unless they are stopped from standing, we will elect them ourselves. Which means there's a responsibility on the part of the public that must also be preached. So that we're not just saying it's institutions to sack them, people to be taken to court. I think that is an important part of this conversation on leadership and integrity.
Can the EACC do anything about some of these cases we've seen? They've questioned Keter, they've questioned those in State House who were adversely mentioned during Keter's tirade that we saw at the Weighbridge in Gilgil. But is the EACC empowered to do anything beyond questioning that we've seen?
Back to my question about fundamentals going wrong, I have absolutely no faith whatsoever in the EACC. I think things are going to be very hard and thick for Kenyans before they're better. I think we have to rethink the way in which we make change. And I don't think it's going to happen in this having faith in these institutions that have failed us, that have problematic issues that begin from when they were appointed, the way in which they operate. So I think that Kenyans have to think long and hard and think of alternative ways, and I think it's going to be hard before it's better, for sure.
As we conclude, I'd just like to ask you, because I'm holding here the ad that was in the paper, Bwana Waiganjo, and some of the issues that were raised were, and someone said on Twitter today, that the Commission sometimes seems helpless. This is what it said. We're reminding state officers of their obligations. We're also requesting those institutions with the responsibility of enforcing Chapter 6, including the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We're asking the public not to lower their expectations. And some say the CIC seems almost helpless and not able to deal with this runaway breach of law. And that this whole ad in the paper was...
And in a sense, Yvonne, the reality is that the powers, for all that people might imagine about the powers of the CIC to stop, the powers of the CIC are very limited at two levels. One is that short of going to seek a court direction, a determination by court, that an officer does not meet the threshold set by the law and therefore should leave office, there's almost nothing else we can do. We must leave that to other institutions. Number two, we're very aware that in another 10 months, and because we have said publicly we will not seek an extension of office, that in another 10 months we'll be out of office. If we purport to take the responsibility of ensuring and compliance with the Constitution, what happens in 11 months? So in a sense, we must keep telling people, ultimately you need to ensure that the protection of this Constitution is your responsibility. I would have wanted that Etienne Lodomo, who has lost faith in everything, I don't know where she'll go after this, because she has no faith in anyone, and you still have to stay here, and you still have to say, and you still have to stay here. Ultimately, what I'd have seen is that she and those who feel like her, that have instituted, because the evidence is there, have instituted several proceedings to declare a couple of members of parliament, a couple of state officers, including members of CIC, unfit to hold public office. That is the responsibility on the citizen that the Constitution expects.
Can you not go to the Supreme Court and ask for, an interpretation or perhaps strengthening of these laws?
We actually, we went to court on this statute.
Yes.
We went to court, the court did not disagree with us, and we respect the decision of the court. By the way, the reality is this, that even without a strong leadership and integrity law, there are still provisions in the Constitution and in that weak law that will enable us to take certain actions. We also, as institutions, have failed to do that. Now, what we are saying is that both citizens, because ultimately citizens must do something. I want to see civil society sitting and taking evidence before the High Court and saying X, instead of just talking, X does not befit that office. I want to see the EACC, I want to see other institutions going to court even with a weak law, because the opportunities are there. So we must also not all sit helpless and say the Constitution is horrible, everything is horrible, institutions don't work. Then we go where Yvonne.
I'm speaking the truth, and I'm speaking as a Kenyan who's actively involved. Part of the problem for me is that CIC, in interpreting its mandate, and I think this now has to be said, because they've been in existence for years, they are on their last lap, because they're only to be around for 5 years unless it's determined that they get an extension, and he says they're not intent on an extension, is to say that by narrowly interpreting their mandate to be very legalistic, they also limited their ability to do things that could have brought far-reaching change. If they had a little more faith in Kenyans than, this lamentation where they keep saying, what are the citizens not doing? Kenyans do their part. But they need to be met the other way by institutions that have been mandated, that are paid very well, that have security of tenure to do things that are going to push the law to a level where it makes a difference in people's lives. I think constitutional commissions have to have better respect for Kenyans, have to do more. In fact, when they introspect, they should ask themselves, have we really lived to the expectations and the spirit of the Constitution? I think in the case of CIC and most of the other constitutional commissions, unfortunately, the answer is a big resounding no.
Okay. Irungu, your final comments on all of this, what we hope to see from Parliament, and whether people should still look up to you as the champion for integrity and accountability in the House.
For myself, I'm going to speak for the coalition to which I belong to. We have already dissociated ourselves to the actions of those two members. We have said publicly that we do not support their actions, and indeed action should be taken against them. Number two, I would propose that the office which has the constitutional duty to enforce the penal code, to do that. To me, that office is the office of the Director.
Do you believe the laws are weak? Do you hope to do something about strengthening them?
To me, I doubt as to whether they are weak. To me, I think they are sufficient. However, if anyone can give us a proposal for us to make those laws better, fine. I'm ready and willing.
Perhaps you need to have a sit down with Kamodo.
Yes,
just given some of those proposals.
Those proposals are actually before the House.
Right.
You know, but we'll continue to work together.
Yeah.
The point is, I'm a member of the Committee of Legal and Justice Affairs. I do promise I'm going to support those proposals and ensure that we strengthen the current statute that governs these issues.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Irungu Kangata, Member of Parliament Kiharu. We also have Atieno Ndomo, who is a governance expert and commissioner with the CIC, Kamodo Waiganjo. Thank you all for your time. That has been our discussion on Checkpoint, but as always with all the back and forth, we want to condense all of this into something that makes sense. John Alanamo, what is the point tonight?
Leadership affects all of us in this country, and of course that discussion encapsulating quite a number of the problems that we have in Kenya as concerns the application of Chapter 6. But in terms of what the point of that discussion was, let's try and crystallize that to 3 questions. The first is Kenya more, or rather are Kenyans more accepting of bad leadership? Why is this? Is bad leadership the new normal? We need to start confronting the reasons why we let a governor, for instance, slap a woman in public and get away with it, or have a senator, for instance, parade around town with bodyguards armed to the teeth and think that that is okay. Those are things that we need to start questioning, and especially why that is. Why is it that we'd allow these sorts of things to happen as a public? And secondly, is the law and our legal institutions given enough power to prosecute bad leadership? The answer, of course, is yes, in view of that discussion. The Constitution gives sufficient teeth in many respects to the legal institutions as well as to the public in terms of pursuing people who are placed, who are given such a high public trust, especially state officers, with respect to Chapter 6. The question that we need to ask is it being applied selectively? Or are legal institutions not doing enough? Is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, is Parliament, are the courts doing enough? But finally, how can the public enforce Chapter 6? And that perhaps is the crux of the matter, because a lot of frustration builds up when it appears that Chapter 6 is not being enforced by the leaders who a lot of public have placed their trust in. But there are very many avenues through which the public can enforce Chapter 6, or various versions of looking for proper leadership in this country, some of which has been discussed in this panel. Others are protest, for instance, petitioning leaders, the power of recall. All of these are laid down in the Constitution. But of course, the one thing that people perhaps need to address is the will to be able to do this. After all, the saying goes, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people rather to do nothing. And that is the point.
Welcome back to the point of news. Let's update you now on some good news from Egypt. Al Jazeera journalist Peter Grester is being deported from Egypt to his native Australia, the state news agency and police say. The Australian ex-BBC correspondent was arrested in December 2013 and imprisoned last June on charges that included spreading false news. There is no word on the 2 Al Jazeera men who were jailed with him, Mohammed Fahmy and Bahir Mohammed. They were also accused of collaborating with the banned Muslim Brotherhood after the overthrow of President Mohamed Morsi by the military in 2013. Egypt's top court had in January ordered a retrial of the 3 men, but an Egyptian official told AFP today that there is a presidential decision to deport Peter Grester to Australia. On December 31st last year, Grester's parents pleaded for his release, and at the beginning of this year, Grester himself asked to be deported from Egypt.
Great news there for Al Jazeera journalists. Of course, we hope that the two other journalists, Mohammed Fahmy as well, are released as soon as possible. Now back to news happening in this country. Narok continues to be a political hotbed, and pundits trace the recent unrest to underlying political issues. It would appear that Governor Samuel Ole Tunai finds himself at the center of this latest uprising in the local political scene. KTN's Wilson Buru has just returned from Narok, where he engaged the residents on the issues affecting Narok County.
At the home of Sikona Munted, preparations are underway for his burial on Monday after he was allegedly shot by a police officer during demonstrations in Narok a week ago. A somber mood engulfs the homestead, residents speaking in hushed tones as some music belts out in the background. Sikona's wife, Naisari Saru, can barely walk without support, tears rolling down her eyes. She sits quietly with her children, her gaze revealing the shock and anguish of a woman who just lost her husband. And when she speaks, she struggles to retell the events of Monday the 26th, when her husband left the house to attend a demonstration called for by the area leadership, only for her to later be told that he had been shot and killed in the ensuing fracas. Sikona's brother Simon is visibly angry about what transpired on that day. He tells us that Sikona was a butcher and had left the house in the morning as usual, after which he turned up for the demonstrations.
Ilikuwa ni peaceful demonstration kwa sababu hatukuwa na vita. Hatukuwa na chochote. Wakati nilifika pale, kulikuwa na askari ambao walikuwa ndani ya county, ambao mmoja wao alirusha bunduki na kumfyatua huyo ndugu wetu na akafa hapo hapo.
But the lingering question is, why had they decided to turn up for the demonstrations? Did they understand the issues, or was it just blind loyalty to their leaders?
Sisi tumesoma tukiwa wengi hapa, tunapeana makaratasi zetu tupewe kazi. Hakuna mtu ambaye amepewa kazi. Tunaambiwa tu ni siku hapo imebaki ya kupewa kazi, na bado hatuoni mpaka saa hii.
County belongs to us. It is us to provide leadership, especially at this moment.
A few kilometers away, we meet Daniel Olana, a taxi driver near Narok town. His saloon car raises a cloud of dust as he drops off a client. His sentiments very similar to those of Simon. He's not happy with the governor's performance so far.
Barabara imeharibika kabisa. Hata barabara ya ndani ya town, hata hii potholes imejaa kabisa. Unaendesha gari, magari zinaharibika, hakuna mtu anatengeneza, hakuna maendeleo tunaona kabisa.
Back at Sikona's home, his neighbors are arriving to condole with the family, but the anger in their comments is evident.
Umepoteza ndugu yetu sababu ya haki yetu, na ni mtu wa nguvu na anafanya kazi yake.
Chaguzi ifanyike ili tupate viongozi ambayo wanaheshimu watu wa Narok County. So naweza sema ya kwamba governor itolewe.
Tuongee, let's embrace dialogue. You bring up all the issues, I'm sure we'll be able to resolve them.
As Sikona's wife walks back into the house, one cannot help but feel sorry for her and her family.
It is a tragic story of a demonstration gone awfully wrong. And the family of the late Sikona has only one wish: let not the death of their brother, their son, their father and their neighbor be in vain. Wilson Buru, KTN in Oldonyorasha village, Narok County.
All right, let's switch gears completely now, and it's that time of the week now. Governors are essential because they help make lives better. But when the governor is not working properly and effectively, isn't the logical thing to remove said governor? Tonight on Mock the Week, Wilson Buru tells us about effective governors and MCA wannabes who already want to change careers.
It is yet another episode of Mock the Week. My name is Wilson Buru, and
Before we go very far, let's talk about something that I read some time back about Pope Francis, who decided to go visit Manila, which is the capital city of the Philippines. And here's the interesting part. To ensure that the law enforcers did not leave their designated workstations, they were told they had to wear adult diapers or nappies because of, you know why? There's no arguing with the call of nature, right? Which brings me to the president's aide-de-camp. No, not that one. That's the deputy president. Yes, that one. Here's my question to you. Have you ever seen the president's ADC excuse himself to go and say call of nature?
If you came across some strange mucus or feces or something out there on the subway, the street, or anywhere else, don't eat it. Don't eat it. Don't eat it.
All right. I want us to ask ourselves, what is the role of a governor? Those are called speed limiters nowadays, and that particular brand has actually been banned in Kenya. I'm speaking of a real governor. That's right. This is Narok Governor Samuel Ole Tunai. And apparently, the people of the Narok County don't need him anymore. Reason? They say he's slowing them down. Tunai had thought that he had tuned the residents of his county into giving him an early Valentine's Day present when they showed up at his office all dressed up in red. But he became a bit curious after looking closely and discovering that they had indeed showed up carrying rungus and machetes instead of flowers. So, he called for help from none other than the guys who love tear-gassing children. And come they did, armed with their favorite toys, and just as was the case with the children, they once again forgot to bring in the strawberry or vanilla flavored tear gas. And for you to survive such, you have to run for your dear eyes. But what exactly is the problem here?
Hiyo haitatulete pamoja katika kaunti ya Narok.
Yes. When the governor is suspected to be slowing down your transport machinery, you remove it and replace it with a new one, and the cycle continues. Let me say this. We do not take it lightly that 2 people died in that fracas after they were allegedly shot. Our hearts go out to their grieving families, and we hope that the investigations will, of course, reveal what happened on that day. But speaking of counties and people slowing down, there's a group of individuals we haven't really talked about of late because they put governors to curb their shenanigans. Remember our dear MCAs? Now, it would seem that very many people took the job of being an MCA as a privilege, including this guy.
It's an interest of the electorate that these MCAs continue fighting.
Are you sure you are the MCA for Kilimani in Nairobi?
When the guys at KTN told people that they could audition to become a presenter at the station, they probably had no idea that there would be imposters in town. Enter Mr. Otieno, a wannabe MCA.
Are you sure you are the MCA for Kilimani in Nairobi?
Yes.
Don't you have a county assembly to attend?
The reason we call Mr. Otieno here a wannabe MCA is because we kind of did a search on the internet, and the said search revealed, in fact, that the Kilimani MCA in Nairobi is called Moses Ogeto Nyangaresi. Interestingly, he looks something like this. Yeah, we couldn't find a photo of that guy. That said, though, let's entertain this guy and bring in our MCA specialist, Jerry Mushura.
MCAs constantly made the headlines in 2014 because of their dispute resolution tactics that always seem to involve blows, shoves, and kicks. But it seems this year, however, MCAs want to turn over a new leaf. According to some of them, they are tired of the constant fighting and the aches and pains that follow. They want to change, to become better, and to be the elected officials all Kenyans can be proud of. So what brought about this drastic change of heart? Well, let's just call them threats. Have you heard of the boxing kangaroo? There was a suggestion that this fierce animal would be brought to every county assembly to box any MCA who felt like he or she was itching to fight. And boy, can this kangaroo box. It is also rumored that the boss of all bosses, Mr. President himself, had had enough of their childish ways and had threatened to take them to Pokot to fight real men who have very interesting ways of showing just how much they love and cherish the woman they want to date.
Come back. The things people do for love.
But the main reason, I think, is that they're bored. I mean, they already have spent 5 million shillings learning how to use Facebook and Twitter. What more can they do as MCAs?
Are you sure you are the MCA for Kilimani in Nairobi? Yes. Don't you have a county assembly to attend?
You know that saying that says quitters don't win? Yeah, it's absolute rubbish. If you think I'm pulling your leg, ask this guy. His name is Elijah Memusi, and he's a quitter of political parties. Let me give you the story of Elijah Memusi in a very short summary. In 2013, he quit the ODM for Jubilee. Then he lost the election to an ODM guy. Then the ODM guy joined the Jubilee government, and Elijah was happy until that time when Jubilee did their nominations, and he lost that as well. And he went running back to ODM, and voila, he won.
Elijah Kanchori Mumesi will be the Orange Democratic Movement Party's flag bearer.
And the moral of the story is, if you quit once and it doesn't work, try harder. Don't slow down. Quit again until you win.
Alright, time for some sports news now. And Africa Zone 5 champions USIU Flames finally clinched its maiden women basketball Premier League title after edging out defending champions KPA 3-1 in the best-of-5 playoff finals played in Mombasa and Nairobi. Flames, who have finished as finalists for 2 seasons in a row, stood against tradition to oust the 12-time champions in a fashionable sweet revenge after sealing an 81-50 triumph in Game 4 in a Game 4 decider at a packed Nyayo National Stadium gymnasium. The first quarter proved nervy to the sides, but Flames were lucky to take a 22-14 lead. The duel was turned on its head in the second quarter when the Dockers closed in 29-24 with unrelenting attacks from Yvonne Akinyi. USIU put the pressure on for a final 81-50 score, and USIU carried home 600,000 plus a trophy as their opponents got 300,000 shillings in consolation.
I'm really humbled by this win. It's the second time for me as a player, but the first time with my teammates. I've come a long way with my teammates. They've been supporting me on and off the basketball court. This year we've been the champions in Eastern Central. Now we are the champions in the Premier League. I cannot ask for a better gift.
The standard is too high for the ladies. It has improved. I'm happy for my team. They've done well despite losing the championship. At times it's good to lose so that you go do your homework well and the correction.
Congratulations to the girls from my alma mater. Now, Kenya Premier League champions Gor Mahia failed to convert numerous chances into goals and eventually suffered a 3-0 loss at the hands of Zambia's Power Dynamos in a friendly match played at the Nyayo National Stadium. The defeat comes just 2 weeks before Gor Mahia kicks off its continental campaign against Madagascar's Caisse Nationale de Prévoyance Sociale Sport, what a name, on the 14th of this month.
Kenya Premier League champions Gor Mahia has been taking part in a series of friendly matches as they seek to improve their results on the continental level. After 2 friendly matches against Premier League side Bandari FC and Coast combined, Kogalo went continental, welcoming Zambian giants Power Dynamos to the Nyayo National Stadium. Buoyed by their ever-supportive fans, Kogalo got into the match looking set to reward their fans. They, however, registered a series of missed chances. Gor could have taken the lead in the 25th minute after Dynamos defender handled the ball in the area, but keeper Joel Kanyimba saved Timothy Otieno's spot kick. The visitors' efforts were rewarded on the stroke of halftime through Kennedy Mudenda's penalty kick after Collins Okoth fouled Govenda Simwala in the box before adding a 55th minute goal through Alex Ngonga. The hosts got another opportunity to score, but new signing Michael Olunga blasted wide a penalty. Luka Lungu made it 3-0 for Dynamo from a counter-attack in the 79th minute to hand Gor Mahia their second pre-season defeat after they were beaten 2-0 by Bandari a few weeks ago.
It's never about the results at this stage of the season. It's about preparations. It's about getting the boys 90 minutes with each game, 90 minutes with each game. We could have won all the matches, we could have had very easy friendly games if we wanted. But that's not the kind of position we are going to play. We are getting these tougher matches so we can get them fitter faster.
The strength, we knew the strength of Gor Mahia. They are fast learners, so we worked on the space. We covered the space well.
Goro unajua ilikuwa friendly. So Goro walikuwa wanajaribu maplayer wao wapya. So kujaribu. So far so good.
No ball work. They were just boring. No control on everything.
Gor Mahia kicks off its continental campaign against Madagascar's Kaiser National de Province Social Sport on 14th of this month. Lynn Washira, KTN Sports.
On to some athletics news now, and Cynthia Limo has won the Discovery Marathon, and newcomer Daniel Keitany was the toast of the tournament of the day, beating an elite field to bag the bragging rights in the 24th edition of the Discovery Kenya Half Marathon.
Hundreds of athletes turned up for the 24th edition of the Discovery Half Marathon organized in Eldoret, Uasin Gishu County. Just as has been the norm, the athletes were close together as if sizing up each other with no one willing to take the initiative. But as the race wound down, it was Daniel Keitany who showed the appetite to bag the title. Keitany shot from the back at 18-kilometer point, taking the lead as Silas Sang, Alfred Rono and others kept in close tabs. The 32-year-old Keitany then toyed them around before unleashing a devastating kick to victory in 65 minutes 04.2 seconds. Silas Sang was second in 65 minutes 25.4 seconds, while Rono was third in 65 minutes 20.3 seconds. Cross-country sensational runner rounded off the podium finish.
Family bank ndio nilikuwa namba 3, alafu nikaenda Kabarnet nikashika 8. Leo ndio mimi nikakuja kubeba sasa race.
Cynthia Limo boasts 68 minutes 24 seconds all-time mark in 21 kilometers set in Boston. Half marathon controlled the rest from 2-kilometer mark, steadily widening the gap to victory. Purity Changoni trailed behind as former winner Alice Timbilil emerged from the woods after nearly 1 year spell out to claim third spot in a time of 30 minutes 48.9 seconds.
So kulingana na kosa iko mbaya, ni ile tu hali ilikuwa chua, na wakati mwingine mwaka chana kwa machaliwa. Ni vizuri wapeane match kwa kilomita 5 ndio watu waenze kuwa sawa.
Limo said the hot weather conditions that dehydrated had denied her better times.
From athletics, we now move to motocross. An MX50 champion, Jet Takunen, Tyler Huth, and Lemayan Wayaki made podium finishes in the autocross championships at Jamhuri Park grounds. Apollo Mbuki was the star attraction of the race that attracted a huge turnout at the grounds. Mbuki in an MX1 beat a strong field of riders with the likes of Maxine Wahomena and Azir Sherman unable to dethrone the speedster. Tutumaina and defending champion Ivan Goya were nowhere in the first round. Autocross fans will have a lot to enjoy this year, with the country selected to host the 2015 FIM Africa Enduro Championship.
Not to get any injuries this season, and I think perform the best I can. I think I can easily be in the top 2 if I train hard and continue training the way I have been.
Like, I have to watch him, see how he goes, and I know like this is his first race and he's already doing well. His fitness is good. And then also Gugi's fitness is good, and he's a very consistent rider, so I need to watch them throughout the year.
At an indoor academy in Kabul, Afghanistan, cricketers are training hard for their debut in the upcoming World Cup tournament in Australia and New Zealand next month. They face a tough fight in a group which includes test powerhouses Australia, Sri Lanka, England and New Zealand. Only the top 4 in each group go through to the knockout stages. Shuttle runs and lifting weights help keep out the bitter chill of the Afghan winter as the players tune up for the tournament on warmer Antipodean shores. The Afghans' opening match against Bangladesh in Canberra on February the 18th will mark the culmination of a fairy tale journey for a team born in the ashes of decades of war. Afghanistan qualified for the last 2 World 2020 tournaments in 2010 and 2012, but lost all their matches. However, this will be the first time in the 50-over tournament. Cricket came to Afghanistan through refugee camps in Pakistan, where countless Afghans fled the 1979 Soviet invasion of their homeland. After learning it in exile, young Afghans brought cricket back with them when the Taliban fell in 2001, and the game has gone from strength to strength ever since.
This is our first time to play a World Cup, 50-hour World Cup, and especially I'm very happy as a captain to represent Afghanistan in the World Cup, and it's a big achievement for Afghanistan cricket.
Afghanistan future is so bright, so we have good talent here, so we have a bright future here.
All right, so I know why Lynn wasn't available to do the sports news tonight. What was the name of that in Madagascar?
I'm not even going to try. It was like 4 French names in quick succession. I tried though. My French teacher, Monsieur Serugan,
must be very proud.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's get into some of the feedback regarding our discussion tonight. We're talking about Chapter 6 and the breaches of that by several elected members of parliament in the recent past. Here are your thoughts. Maimuna5 on Twitter, you say, selective implementation of the Constitution is what's best known of our leaders. Bare Osman on Twitter says, too many commissions established to burden the taxpayers, not producing any good result. And what's interesting, John, is that the CIC is coming under fire over how they've handled this issue.
True.
Let me read another one here from Mohammed Noor Adam, who says, far from breaking the law, Keter and Sonia Birdi, in fact, exposed the cancer of corruption that has marred the traffic sector. So some support there for Keter.
I've got one here from Joseph Mutiso saying, in Kenya, leaders have failed to understand that they can as well be servant and serve better. Better the position than title. That's an interesting perspective, given that we often never see servant leadership, although there have been some leaders who have been quick to use that as campaign slogans in terms of their leadership.
Absolutely.
Let's see if we've got another one. Dixon Miranda says, true, but then these leaders get re-elected over and over again. We need to remove them. We employ and should fire.
Yeah.
People taking the power that is the vote and using it well.
Right. Yeah.
Is really something that you guys laid into quite a bit.
Yes. I mean, I think there's also the issue of recall of members of parliament. That is something that is entirely possible and open. So just taking a look at who can do what, and if we feel at some point that certain commissions aren't doing their work, then the power does lie with the people. Let me just read one more from Muli.
who says, in Kenya, people are not equal. We should not blame the members of parliament, but ourselves for electing them, period. So again, power to the people, or people not taking the power that is vested.
All right, one last one. Etiang Eli Emot says all state organs, state officers and public officers must be made responsible to citizenry for their actions. But the question is by who?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Kamoto Waiganji was talking about. At the end, there is a bit of an abdication of responsibility by members of the public to their role to keep leaders honest and keeping them accountable, because we'd say they should be accountable, but they should be accountable to us.
Yeah, the people who put them there. All right, so that is your feedback tonight. Thank you so much for all your tweets, all your text messages, and indeed for watching our bulletin tonight. It is the first of the month, so I hope you have a great week ahead and a great month ahead as well. Have a good evening, have a good night. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matole.
And I'm John Alanamu. Have a good night.